Good morning and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, I know many of y'all's names. Some of y'all I have not met yet, so I hope that moving forward we will be able to work more with your graduate students. My goal really for this session is to kind of talk about, we're dividing it into two parts. So we're going to talk about how to manage your TAs in helping you with your online course and grading, that sort of thing. But I know that many of y'all are very seasoned with doing that, so I will encourage y'all to contribute ideas as well as we go. And then we're going to be looking at some tools in Blackboard that you may not be aware of to help you with grading in an online course, in a large enrollment course, and using your TAs. So I want to talk about, there's a couple of things I think as the instructor of record, things you need to do with respect to your role in managing your TA, and that has to do with definition of their role and development of skills that they should be doing. One of them including time management, as well as communication between you and your TA and the students. And then support that should be provided, we hope, as well as some grading expectations, which Lydia will then expand upon. So as I am going through this, I do want everyone to contribute into the chat box some other ideas that you may have used in the past, or questions that you have with respect to TA responsibilities and management. But I think the primary thing you should do with your TAs and managing the course itself is defining what their role is at the outset. This is important because if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, they will maybe floundering. If you have multiple TAs, some TAs may be doing a larger component of the work than others. I know that has been an issue in certain courses in the past. And so you, as the professor of record, it's your responsibility to make sure that task assignment is equitable and make sure that you keep up with that or not. Some students will get faster as they go. Some students may be struggling. So making sure that the students know what your expectations are, and we'll get into that in a second, but what their responsibilities are and what your priorities are for what they're supposed to be doing. You want them to focus on grading first, and then if they have the time in their 10 or 20 hours per week, doing some other course tasks, but what your priorities are that they need to do first. But again, being sure that you're being consistent and fair with respect to what you give your TAs with the work that they do. And I mentioned equity in work. I didn't say equality, because some students may be better at certain things than others, but if they're still putting in the same amount of time, then there still is equity in what they're actually, the amount of time they're spending, and you are making best use of their skill set in their TA-ship. It doesn't mean that they won't get to do some of the other stuff, but if you are trying to be efficient, this is something you want to think about. But I think it's also important, especially if you have a new TA, that they don't know what to do unless you give them the guidance in how to do that. And it's not because, these are graduate students, they're smart people. They don't know necessarily what is important yet because they've never taught yet. I remember my first semester teaching, it was terrible because I didn't have any guidance. So knowing how to do it how you want them to do it, it's not going to be perfect, but they do get better with time. And I always tell my TAs in my workshops, don't try and make it perfect necessarily, because you're going to learn how to do it better by doing it the first time. Make sure you explicitly define, as I said, your priorities with respect to the grading, how to communicate, what type of feedback you want them to give, and I'll get into that in a second, as well as what prep work you're going to be having them do with respect to the class. And Lydia will touch more on that as well. How you want the course to be organized and the structure of it. So you've taught hopefully this course before, you know how it should go. The students may not have, so giving them a good idea from the beginning, perhaps each week, what the class is going to be like, where the TA is going to help out, especially if you're going from face-to-face and online. you're doing a flipped model, a flex model, whatever it might be, giving them an idea of visually of how it's supposed to go will really go a long way for them to be able to troubleshoot in the future. You all know, of course, knowing what the different policies are, but really explicitly talking to them about when this happens in attendance, whenever this happens if a student missed tests, this is what I expect, this is where I hold the line. Some conversations, which we'll get into in a little bit, about medical requests, COVID situations. Those are things you probably have already started thinking about, talking with your department regarding how to handle it. You need to communicate this to your TAs. And I've gotten numerous emails of TAs asking me what's going to happen. And of course, nobody knows, but that also is a response on a departmental level of how things are going to be handled. So they need to be communicated this. And you want to talk about what their tasks are, not just overall, but I highly recommend doing daily tasks or at least weekly tasks for what you want them to do for course management. What do you want them to do in Blackboard, not just grading, but Blackboard, material management, updating, whether you want to have them help you set it up. I know many of you have already set up most of your course, which is amazing. Do you want them to add weekly content? What do you not want them to change? What is static and should not be changed? I think that that's important to think about. I have a couple of guides, and so I'm going to pull up some content that I want to show you, and we'll send these to you. But I have a guide of a sample TA guide and a sample checklist. This is a sample teaching assistant guide where it tells the students what is their responsibility, what do they do in discussion rooms, how do they check progress, reminders, how do they send out reminders, or if you want them to send out reminders, how they gather feedback, how do they want to do office hours. Those are things that you can put into a document. You may actually already have this document, which is wonderful. Give that to your TAs, have your TAs update it for you as you go through the semester. Don't wait for it to be the end of the semester because you'll forget really important things. The other sample guide that I wanted to show you was a TA checklist template. This is a checklist that you give your TAs at the beginning of the semester, what they need to be doing, or you can do it as a monthly or a weekly reminder. They need to do this every week. So what are some skills they need to learn in advance? What Blackboard skills you really want them to learn? Where to go for those, and of course reach out to the CTE to find good resources, and I'll show you one of those in just a second. What the course policies are, of course, reminders about things like FERPA, tone and class pulse, which I'll talk about in a second. Basically, how the students your TAs will be helping your students, ways to do that, things to say. And so I like in this checklist, it shows examples of what can happen. And so for those of you who have been teaching these courses, you know what's going to happen. You know the excuses that may come up. You know the situations that may happen. Give those to students so they know how to troubleshoot them and know how to respond to them in advance. So these examples and sample templates are, as I said, going to be given to you, and we hope that you use them or just make versions of them as you go through your actual course. Okay, so with respect to role definition, students, and I talk about this in TA orientation, the students shouldn't be their friend and such, but I think in some situations in courses, especially if your students really work closely with, or your TAs work closely with their students, you may have them, excuse me, be more of a coach, and perhaps how to write, how to do debates or discussions, rather than being more of a friend to them, of course. But do you want your students to also make sure that they encourage their students to come to them if they're having problems? So I say confidant, but I mean more of the TAs need to make sure their students know that they can trust them, of course, and let them know if they're struggling. Letting students, your TAs, know how to handle the challenges are going to come up, cheating issues. These are all often tend to be discipline specific. Do you have a lot of plagiarism? Do they work together on lab reports, whatever it might be. Discuss this in advance and talk about how it should be handled. Should the TAs talk to the students first, or do you want them to talk to you first about the problems and then you give them guidance? So that is important to address that in the beginning. If you want your students, or if you're going to have your students do discussion, breakout sessions, or management in general, the feedback that you're asking or wanting your TAs to give, talk about that. I know history does a really great job of showing their students how to grade, as well as do discussion breakouts. And so having an idea already of what you want them to do, talk about the type of feedback they should give, how often, how much, how should they grade it? Do they grade discussion based on percent participation? And I think that this is a discussion that needs to be done in an online environment. How are you going to assess participation, or are you going to assess participation? So those are some things that you can work out in advance and talk about. How do they lead discussions? For TAs who have not ever had practice in discussions, it's very stressful, and it's something that can be nerve-wracking. So helping show them how to do that. I give a workshop in Grad 701 that I'm happy to give to any department, of course, about the best ways to lead discussions. Is it a coaching way? Is it an encouragement type? How do they monitor it? All of these things are, again, stuff that your TAs haven't had experience with, and you need to tell them how you want it done. You may be different in your section compared to another section or another course section that another instructor is teaching. And then talk about, to your TAs, do they do study groups? Should they be doing tutoring, or do they instead refer them to the Student Success Center? Do they facilitate all this on their own, or do you give them a set amount of materials that you want them to go over in office hours? This differs between, of course, I think science versus humanities versus, say, math and statistics that has recitation sessions. So these do tend to vary a little bit. But how they do that is something that TAs, I think, are very nervous about. I've gotten a lot of feedback over the years of TAs saying, can you do a workshop on how to lead office hours and tutoring sessions? And I think for us who are experienced instructors, it honestly, it came to me as a surprise. And then I thought, well, no, that's understandable. As a new TA, you're not sure what the best practices are. So give them that guidance on how to manage those things, or send them to me. Or I'll come to y'all and give some feedback and do a webinar on best practices. So these are, again, all things in the role that needs to be discussed explicitly with your TAs of how you want that role to be expressed, and what they're supposed to be doing with respect to their responsibilities. With respect to skill development, depending on what type of TAs you get, whether they're experienced or not, you need to think about what the competencies are that you want from them. How much knowledge do they need? A depth of knowledge in the TA-ship, in the content? Do they need to be proficient in Blackboard? All these things, if they don't have it, you need to help show them where to get that or how to provide it. And again, remember that they don't yet have experience in pedagogy and how students learn. And they may not have that depth of content knowledge that is already second nature to you, that you may not realize that they don't have, and they can't necessarily troubleshoot questions that students have. So something to think about. As I talked about with skills, tech skills, there is a resource here, and we'll send you the direct link as well, or Lydia will copy it into the chat. Blackboard really does have great webinars for how instructors can do things with the Blackboard tools. And there are a whole lot of new tools that have come out over the summer based on feedback from people and what they need, and also Blackboard trying to compete with things like Zoom. So those are things, go and have your students actually do those learning modules, essentially learning webinars in advance to help them get ready for the semester. Also help them do or develop as a TA. Let them write questions and tests. Give them feedback on it. Let them help you develop course material. These are skills that they should be developing, and I know many of you are very good mentors in helping your TAs develop these things as they go. And then I think, especially now this semester, and there's been a lot of essays put out there recently with respect to, we are entering basically a new era of higher education. Take advantage of it and let TAs kind of think of outside the box of what might be a good way to do this that we're not doing in this course, a better way to analyze this resource, or a better way to explore this topic. How might we adapt assessments? How can we be flexible? I was on a webinar yesterday for a remote teaching conference where they put and those of you in chemistry are going to gasp, they put an organic chemistry lab online to be done in 3.5 days. And it worked because they completely thought outside the box. And so organic chemistry is extremely content intensive, but because they thought outside the box of what it was they wanted their students to take away, what were the actual true learning outcomes, it actually really worked. And they, compared to a 14-week course, content knowledge and learning outcomes actually scored higher from that 3.5 intensive 8 to 5 every day than the actual 14-week course. It was really amazing. So have your students help and look into, thank you, Lydia, have your students help you and look into new ways of doing your courses that you may not have really thought about, or they may have come across. Now's the time to really take on new ways of doing things, because we have the option, we have the ability to. So with respect to time management, I know that I'm not the best in time management, but I know that there are, I use that skills and tools to help me with that. But with respect to this, some students may come with really good time management skills, some don't. And so that's something that I think that as a mentor and an instructor, you need to help them learn that as they go. I wish that in my degrees, as I was going through my degrees, I had had a better experience in learning how to do time and task management than I did, because it would serve me much better in the future if I had done that originally. But remember, they are first students and scholars, so they also have so much time that they need to be spending on their courses, on their research or their scholarship, on the fact that they are developing academics, so they need to network and they need to go to online conferences, that sort of thing. So again, the TA-ship, and this is something that I say to students, and not that I hate saying it, because it's just the fact that I'm a graduate TA program manager, so I want them to embrace their TA-ship and their responsibilities, but they're here to get a degree. Yes, they're doing TA-ship. Yes, they're learning how to teach. They may decide that the teaching is what they want to do, and that's wonderful, but they still also have to get a degree, so they have to also keep that in focus as well. So if you find that your TAs tell you, and I hope that they will tell you, if you find that they don't have enough hours to do everything you're wanting them to do, whether it's 10 or 20 hours per week, this is where you need to go back and, all right, let's look at what you are doing. Where are you spending your time? And I know many of you have your TAs do a documentation of time spent each week. And this is very helpful to see where is the time being spent. Make sure that they are not taking more time in perhaps grading or posting things or responding to student emails that is taking up more time than they should. They're not being efficient with it. And giving them guidance in the beginning of how long things should take. You can assume that things that would take you a certain amount of time, theirs would take at least twice or 3 times longer. So be thinking about that, because they're not yet efficient at that, and show them ways to be efficient. This is something that really helps TAs to see how you do things and the way you perhaps schedule your time and schedule your tasks. And that way you can show them, this is how much time you have. So let's subdivide your 20 hours, 4 hours grading, 2 hours prep, however you want to do that, and then see if that works. And if it doesn't, go back and adjust as needed. And if you have to adjust different hour amounts for different TAs, again, as long as they're all doing 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week equally, that's what's important, the equity part. And then help guide them in how to set priorities. You are an experienced academic. You know how to set your priorities, where things take longer than others, how to block time, however it is that you do time management. Show your examples, show your experience, and the ways that you do this. Remind TAs, and I found that sometimes this is an issue, that TAs may be afraid to collaborate and talk with other TAs because they don't want them to be thought of as not capable. And that should be put away at the very beginning. Say, look, we're all learning. I want y'all to collaborate and work together, and have this clear communication and learn how to work with each other into a final product or a final project. And I also think it's important to help them learn how to think ahead. I think even some of us are just doing week by week, sometimes especially over the summer, but getting them to think long-term, big picture, larger project, and start planning ahead, even in a TA shift, is an important skill to develop. Again, they're not going to be perfect. They may not even be very good at this, but they need to start learning how to do this. This is a skill as well. And then, of course, communication with you, between each other. Start communicating if you haven't already, and I know many of you have. Start communicating now, early in the semester and often, and make sure that you listen to what their needs are. You know, don't try and troubleshoot what their needs might be or assume certain things. You need to hear what their actual situation and issues may be, because it may not be what you think. But the being very clear with the expectations in the beginning will help with that, because that helps set the standard that you want. And then if they're not coming up to the standard you need, you can go back and have a conversation about that. Okay, so addressing COVID fears. This is an important thing to do now and continue to do with updates. As I said, I've gotten a lot of emails. You need to talk with your TAs about what your plans are or may be, or even if I have no idea, but I have a plan that if this happens and this happens, this is what we're going to do. And let them know that you're there. You know that this is going to be a crazy semester, but everyone working together as a team will help this still be a success, even if it's going to be that, you know, if we have to do a rapid shift to completely remote. You know, having a plan in advance will really help to allay your TA's fears about what this very uncertain future is. I talk about being understanding with respect to what the COVID situation is. And I say, you know, thinking about your own situation by comparison. You have a relatively stable job, most of y'all. You know what's going to be happening in the next year or two. The TAs, and you saw this with the internationals, we're not even sure, you know, week to week, perhaps what might be happening. So thinking about the fact that you have a stable job, you have a stable income, the TAs do not, and this is, you know, this is common across the academy. That itself then puts a huge amount of stress into their daily life. So keep that in mind to help allay their fears, to really have an open conversation about this. Now, the other thing that we don't like to think about is what's going to happen if a student gets sick. What is a TA supposed to do? What are you going to do? If the TA gets sick, who covers for them? What will their responsibilities, if any, be? And if they don't have any, do they lose their funding? These are questions that I've been getting, and I know departments have been getting. These are things you need to talk about now to help allay their fears and concerns. If you get sick, what happens? Do they cover for you? Does another instructor cover for you? This, again, it will probably be dependent on what the departments want you to do, but let your TAs know what these, what's going to happen with respect to these now, so they can start thinking about that and just, again, be a little bit more, feel a little bit less anxious about it. And then, of course, supporting your team, check in with your TAs weekly. I recommend actually doing FaceTime video chats so that you can see and make sure they're okay. There was a couple situations this past summer where some TAs were chatting with their advisor, or one of them actually never even contacted them, saying they were okay, but then actually saw them face to face at one point and it was clear that they were not. So having that FaceTime really helps to develop that community and develop that sense of that someone's there for your TA. This quote that I read, it was in an essay on in higher education. The quote was, it was with respect to a graduate student talking about what the problems are with coming back this fall. Does the administration recognize what graduate students are struggling with? And the quote was, though we may be in the same storm with respect to the pandemic, we are not in the same boat. And so what TAs and graduate students may be struggling with can be very different between what faculty may be struggling with. So again, making sure you're there for support, communication. Your graduate students may not have any workspace because it's been taken up by their children or their significant other, or they just don't have one at home and they can't go to the library. They may not have privacy because they may be living with their sister, brother, family. They may not have access to a computer, financial issues, all sorts of things that can be affecting them and affecting their work will be translated into how they're working. These are things that you need to have your students feel comfortable with talking to you about, because they have that, they need to know that they have support from you. And then again, building that community and that trust. I saw an idea where a TA group had a Finally Friday happy hour. It's not that they were, drinking alcohol or anything, but they just came together on a Friday afternoon and were like, oh, it's finally Friday. What went well? What didn't go well? Not necessarily talking about what's going to happen next week, but just a debrief and a decompress. And I thought that was a really great idea. And make sure that they are comfortable, as I said, addressing their concerns, being able to come to you. Some students, some TAs are afraid of their professors and instructors. Kind of get that past that in the beginning so that they are comfortable coming to you. And then I'm going to just touch on a couple of grading responsibilities because Lydia is going to go into more detail. But again, your students, you may have 1,500 students, or you may have 400 students in some of the other classes in Geology 110. And you may only have 1 or 2 TAs, so be thinking about how long it's going to take them to do the grading that you want them to do, as well as the course facilitation, and start then divide that work into how many TAs you have, or think about what else you may be needing to do to help support them so that they're not working above their 10 or 20 hours per week. And as I mentioned, the TA often takes much longer grading than you do, at least at the beginning. Also let them know what the turnaround time is on assignment grading, so that if that's not happening, you can cut off that issue immediately and work with that issue before it becomes a significant problem. What to be graded and how to be graded, how it should be graded, you need to provide explicit guidelines. Lydia is going to talk about rubrics and how to use them, how to add comments. All of these things are really important that you address in the beginning, from the beginning, so that they are not trying to learn as they go, but they already know what the expectations are. And then finally, working through examples as a group. I know several departments do this where they have, in English and in history, I believe they have students all grade a single paper and then look at how everyone graded across the board and talk about why and where there were inconsistencies, and then how to prevent that from happening in the beginning. Well, what we're going to do next is transition with to Lydia, who's going to talk about the tools that you can use in Blackboard, and there's some new ones. Yes, and I will share that TA template documents with you. I will email that to you, absolutely, both of them. Lydia's going to talk about the tools for grading, some new ones that have been added this summer, and some ways to really help your TAs 1 versus 20 be much more efficient and help you with the course. So Lydia.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. And as you can see, we're going to talk a little bit about assignments. I'm not getting into the details of how to set things up in Blackboard, but just wanted to introduce, if you're not familiar with, some tools that are used for grading and through assignments. Michelle already mentioned the rubrics, but we're going to talk about smart views and how setting up groups might be beneficial for assigning TAs to work with certain students. So, and as you've started working with your instructional designers, I'm sure, just like I've outlined with the faculty I'm working with, it's like ideally, you need to prepare, and especially if you're teaching online, as much of your online materials, your Blackboard course as possible before the first day of class. And this way you can actually focus in on the teaching aspect of managing class. And a lot of you have already started doing that and have made great progress. And especially in terms of what's going to happen this fall, since we're all in the middle of of the unknown, as much as you can build out on Blackboard, the less stress you'll have, and less work you'll have to do to do that once fall starts. But one thing that it's very important to do is to make sure that your TAs are trained on Blackboard. And Michelle's mentioned several of the resources, but there's some great video tutorials out there. There are also DOIT's e-learning services. Their Blackboard support group would be glad to work with your TAs to help train them if they have any questions, or if you have a department of TAs, to put together a workshop specifically for you or for the TAs in this program. And your instructional designers too, you know, you each have one assigned to you. They'll be glad to troubleshoot, find resources, work with your TA briefly if needed. But one thing that is extremely important is to, as Michelle was saying earlier, to let them know what it is you want them to do in Blackboard for you, and be very explicit in instructions and where something should go or what you want them to do. And one thing we find very helpful is to actually practice different activities with TAs in Blackboard, and not only with TAs, but with each other. In terms of if I'm trying to practice a new tool that I'm using, it's great to do so with somebody else. And one of the first things that we wanted to really have your TAs focus on is the needs grading area within Blackboard and familiarizing them with the Grade Center. And if at all possible, set up any online submissions so that they actually appear in the needs grading area first. And your TAs actually look here for items that need to be graded. And it's the simplest way to get to an assignment or a discussion board or even a test with open-ended items or questions that need to be graded, is everything should land in the needs grading area. And if at any time you have any questions, just type them in the chat pod. I'll be glad to answer them. And we're moving on specifically to the assignments assessment tool. Within assignments, you have different options to set up rubrics. You can actually delegate grading, and when you're actually grading an assignment, Blackboard's updated their annotate the assignment Dropbox. Previously, it was a tool called Box. Everything was going into Box. However, a couple weeks ago, they upgraded this to BB Annotate. And they've simplified and expanded some of the inline grading, which you'll see in a few minutes. But one thing that could be very helpful for your graduate teaching assistants is if you could give them some common feedback comments. That way, things from your experience, students in past semesters, that way they can copy and paste something that they could teach them to develop. If you don't have something, teach them to develop their own Word document of common feedback. Even if it's, this is a great essay, or you did a fantastic job, that will cut down on some of their time that they're going to use actually typing out individualized comments. And sometimes everybody has the same issues when they're turning in assignments. But moving on to rubrics. And some of you might be familiar with Blackboard rubrics, but essentially a rubric in Blackboard is just a table of your grading criteria. And it makes it real easy for you and for your TAs to grade consistently and quickly provide feedback. Most importantly, though, you're letting your students know what your expectations are on an assignment. And it could be a very complex rubric, or it could even be a single point criteria rubric. So as simple as or as complex as you need it or want it to be, that the rubric system can be set up. And as I have listed here, you can use rubrics not only with assignments, but you can attach them to discussion boards. If you have an essay within a Blackboard test, or even a short open-ended question, you can attach a specific rubric to that essay, to that one question item, to help with grading. And a lot of you are teaching Carolina core classes that have a big writing component as part of the learning outcomes. And one of the ways to make sure that there's that grading consistency is to use a rubric, and especially if you're having multiple graders look at student work. And it's real easy to set up, real easy to do. And this is what, there are two different versions in Blackboard and two different ways that you can use them. This is an example of what it would look like when you're actually grading your TAs, or you would just click on the different radio buttons. Blackboard automatically calculates all the points up for you. Rubrics can be exported from one course or imported into another. That is absolutely right. You can create one rubric in a course that can apply to your assignments, to your discussion boards, provided that the grading criteria all match what you need it to be. But this is the second way that you can see a rubric and manage and actually use a rubric in Blackboard. And either way, it's grader's choice in terms of what is easier for you, either that or this. This just appears as a pop-up in your screen. Any questions about rubrics real quick before I move on to delegated grading? Okay. So the next thing I wanted to mention was the concept in assignments, in the assignment assessment tool, of delegated grading. When you're setting up the assignment options, there is a grading option that allows you to enable anonymous grading or to delegate. And anybody who's listed as an instructor, a teaching assistant, a grader, all have the ability to grade assignments. And the one great thing about this is that you can set up all of your graders, your TAs, with the same number of students that they actually grade. It will be random, and they're not necessarily going to get the same students, but they'll all, like in this example, you can also toggle between the different view settings and who can reconcile grades. I totally am a proponent that the instructor of record should be the one person that reconciles grades and can change the actual grade itself. But it depends on how much training your TA has and how much of a working relationship you have with them in terms of that level of responsibility. And the next tool I wanted to introduce, I mentioned a minute ago, was BB Annotate. If you have noticed lately, if you've been grading assignments the past few weeks, the tool has changed. It's become a little bit more simplified, but it is a product that Blackboard itself developed, and it allows you to not only annotate over a document that's been uploaded, but you can also provide written feedback to learners, and you can also add notes, and those notes are personal comments that you might want to remember, or the TA might want to remember about a certain student. And so if you were actually grading this, you would provide written feedback either through the feedback to learner tool or through the annotation. And if, again, if you had a rubric attached, it would automatically calculate up the points for you. And then again, in this new tool, just like the old, you would submit, or you could save it as a draft. So it's new but similar. And as you know, within the assignments tool, you have the feature to check for plagiarism through SafeAssign. This is definitely something that you could teach your TAs how to check for you, and to do some of the checking to alleviate that from you if you have a written assignment. And are these features available in both the original and Ultra Course view? Right now, we're only talking about the original view, and I don't know yet in terms of Ultra. I will find out later on today and email you. And if there's some of you that may not be familiar, Blackboard has a new version right now. What most of you have and what your default is called the original course view. But there's a modern, sleek Ultra view. If you're interested, we could chat more about it later. But it is a little bit more, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but a little bit more canvas-like in structure. It's really good if you have a very simple class, very low-tech, few features. It's a very basic structure to get started with. If you're designing from scratch, it's something to investigate. And the next thing I wanted to mention was Smart Views. Within the Grade Center, if you're not familiar with it, it's a great way to delegate grading responsibilities for certain students based on certain criteria to your TAs. If you look in your Grade Center, you have by default assignments and tests. And if you click on them, it automatically takes you to only the assignments, the grade columns that have been tagged or categorized as an assignment or a test. In this example, I created a Smart View for myself, and the Smart View could be organized by users, and those are your students. And you can assign so many students to each of the TAs if you want to create an equal number of students for you to grade, for the TAs to grade, and for anybody else that's taking part. But you can also create Smart Views on different categories too. But it's a really great and handy way. One thing you might want to think about it in terms of that, if you have enough students to split up the number of students, do you want them to randomly grade the same different students with each assignment? Do you want one TA to follow a group of students throughout the entire course? And sometimes that's a good idea. That way they can get to know the students a little bit better. They can track how they're doing on different assignments throughout the term. But efficiency-wise, it could be you just randomly assign students to grade based on other criteria. And finally, I wanted to mention groups, especially if you have large classes. Splitting your class into groups can achieve certain functions, especially if you're in an online class or if you're using Blackboard in any sort of way with your face-to-face class. But definitely online with collaborative projects, groups are a great tool to create that randomized team, or you can have students self-enroll in groups based on different interests or different assignments. You can then use the group to assign the TA to certain groups. And I know most of you have one or two TAs, but you don't necessarily want to have a group set up within Blackboard. It has a specific function, but it could be another way for your TAs to get to know smaller groups in these large classes. And any of these tools that you want more information on, please feel free to ask. We'll be glad to work with you on those, but that's actually wrapping us up. Is there a way to limit the TA's access to specific students? I'd like to have a 1,500 student course that I also use for grades, but the TA has only access to his or her students' grades. I want to say there is. And are you talking about if you're going to merge a course and then you want them to, okay. Yes, there is. And you can put the student, I don't know how many individual sections of courses that you'll have, but you could definitely lock things down, about 60 sections. Wow, okay. Thank you for managing 60 sections of undergraduate classes. I appreciate that, and I know this do too. And OMG is exactly what I was thinking. So thank you, Michelle. And that actually brings us to the end and wrapping things up. If you have any comments or questions for Michelle or me, we'll be glad to answer. And then we're going to let Christy wrap things up for us.
Well, thanks so much, Lydia and Michelle. This has been some great information. Wanted to say once again that we've recorded this session along with the chat. We'll post that up on the Blackboard organization. We will also post those templates that Michelle has provided. I think maybe, I don't know, have some time for question and answer here today, but if you have follow-up questions, check with your designer, reach out to Michelle, Lydia, or me, or if you have requests for a session either for your course team or for more general issues, let me know and we will find the right people and we'll try to set it up. So thanks everybody.